We have with us Amy Cuddy and Adam Grant. I'm sure you know them. Full bios are in your program. Couple of details. I checked Amy's TED Talk, the numbers this morning, and you are quickly approaching 32 million.
I have not checked for a while.
Yeah.
Is it sort of stopped checking?
Which makes me wonder, when you travel, do you wear a hoodie and sunglasses so that there must be people who want to always take selfies with you, right?
There are a lot of Wonder Woman shots in airports, I would say.
I can imagine.
That's probably and at conferences. And on the book tour, I've been telling people no Wonder Woman shot. Like, it becomes a thing.
Right.
Or cardboard cutout would be good for the Wonder Woman shots.
That's great. And I do want to mention there's a wonderful detail in your book where you have your son describing to you what it is you do.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, you analyze why people do what they do, then use what you learn to try to help people be better. And I thought that's a pretty good tagline for why we're here today.
Agree.
Adam Grant, I'm sure you know, Give and Take. He's got a new book out, Originals. I sort of think of Adam as the human superlative. Generally, there's sort of a fastest, youngest to achieve so many things. Also nicest.
Yes.
Adam really lives his Give and Take book, and I can tell you that personally. I went down and spoke to some students at Wharton with Adam, and he and I had dinner afterwards. And I, of course, asked Adam to bring a deck of cards because he's a former professional magician, and I am a sucker for a good card trick. And he did these amazing tricks, and then a week later I'm at work and I go to my mailbox and he has sent me a book of magic tricks. So we lived a give and take moment. He gave it to me and I took it. So I want to start with Amy. Your book, Presence, you've done this wonderful thing where you've asked readers and your fans to go to your website and give their best definition of what presence means. But I'd love to hear your best.
Well, I think that they have parts of it. And there are a couple of themes. One is being yourself. One is sort of removing judgment or ignoring judgment. A third is some kind of synchrony, and I'll get to that in a second. And then the last one is, and this is connection and kindness and generosity. So that you're doing these things in the service of that. So the way that I have defined it is to be attuned to and able to bring forth your best qualities in really challenging, high-stress situations. Because when you can do that, you are confident without being arrogant, your body language and your words all come into sync with each other, and you're actually then able to hear each other because you no longer have this wall up. You're there in the moment, you know who you are, and you can connect with the people who are in the room.
If you could talk a little bit more about the being present part of presence, which is really about listening. So many of the leaders that I talk to, we have discussions about the importance of listening, of showing the people that you're talking to actively listening. So does that come up in your research?
Yeah, it comes up in the book. And this idea that presence liberates others to be present kind of came from this conversation that I had with Julianne Moore, who I interviewed for the book. And we were talking about what happens when she's doing a scene with someone who's not present. And she said, well, you just can't. Like, it doesn't lift. You don't get sort of lift off. You don't elevate it unless the other person is present. And I said, how do you get the other person to be present? And she said, I be present. And she said, what I do is I ask them about themselves, and I let them talk about themselves until they feel seen by me. Mm-hmm. And when they feel seen by me, then you get something really magical, and you get lift off. So I think that really is very much consistent with what you see in the business literature on listening, that when people are able to be present enough to not try to take the floor first or drop the anchor first in a negotiation, they're able to establish trust. So they're there, they're showing people who they really are. That alone establishes trust, but then to actually let people speak and be heard, it's enormously powerful. I mean, you're also gaining information by doing that, but it really does become sort of mutually reinforcing, and people feel safer and safer bringing their best qualities and their most powerful, confident self to these very high-stress situations.
Great. Let's shift to Adam. You've got a new book out, Originals. Sum it up for us. What's the core insight?
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. What were you saying? So yeah, the book is basically about what it takes to be original. So I'm fascinated by nonconformists who stand out and speak up and drive creativity and change in the world. And I was interested in what does it take to become one of those people or a leader who brings that out in others. And my assumptions were that you had to be a first mover, somebody who acted early and quickly, that you had to be somebody who loved taking risks, a daredevil, you had to have great ideas, and you also had to be fearless. And none of those things turned out to be true. It turned out that most originals are actually late movers. They procrastinate a ton, which is great news for many of us. They actually hate taking risk. They're risk mitigators as opposed to risk seekers. They consistently have terrible ideas. In fact, the most original people have more bad ideas than their peers. And that's one of the ways they get to good ideas. And then finally, they feel the same doubt and fear that the rest of us do. They just harness it as a resource. They use it to motivate themselves as opposed to freezing and paralyzing.
Right. And so in every company, there's people who have all these original ideas, but a lot of people kind of self-censor. They say, I've got this great idea, but I just don't want to share it because of X, Y, Z. So what are some of the roadblocks that companies create through culture to keep people sort of holding on to their best ideas rather than sharing them?
The two biggest ones in the data are fear and futility. Right? We've all experienced the fear factor of saying, I'm afraid if I bring up this idea, I'm going to get shot down, or my career is going to suffer, or I'll embarrass my boss. But futility is an even bigger factor. There are lots of organizations where you have the kind of psychological safety that Charles has been writing about. And people say, that nothing bad will happen if I bring an idea to the table. But I just don't believe that anyone is going to take it seriously and implement it, so why bother?
Right, gotcha. We have a room full of leaders here, and I'd love to hear from both of you. I mean, the risk of stating the obvious, tone is set at the top by leaders, so how can leaders set the tone to bring out the best in people based on each of your insights? Let's start with you, Amy.
I think that, so listening, obviously, but and listening and responding so that you don't have that sense of futility. And I totally agree, but fear is the thing that sort of shuts us down and makes us withdraw. Futility is the thing that sort of shuts us down and give up hope, so we stop trying in the future. I think that it's so important for leaders to allow people to take these risks, to make mistakes, and to make big decisions that maybe they weren't allowed to make before. So let me give you one example. This is a company that I've been studying for a little while, and it's kind of an amazing counterintuitive culture because it's a very macho industry. They make machines that make machines. And so it's, the guys that work in these plants are guys who grew up in that high school. They were, football players. They maybe went off to the military and came back, and they're all there together. And their parents worked in these plants. They never had any sense that they had any say, but they're experts. So here's one situation, one of these big laser cutters, and it's giant, had to be replaced. And the two guys that work on it are about 25, best friends from high school. They know this machine inside and out. And so the leadership says to them, you find a replacement. They're like, are you kidding? So they found a replacement. They found the best possible machine to replace that one. They cut them a check and said, drive down to Green Bay and pick it up. And you can't really pick it up. It had to be hauled up by multiple trucks. But the guy who sold it to them said, I've never had people buy a machine like this and actually climb into it and look at the gears and check it out. They have so much pride in this machine. These guys have pictures of things that they made from it in front of their family photos. They are so excited about this thing because they got to, somebody said, we trust you. You know more about this than the person in purchasing, so go out and do it. I think that kind of behavior is pretty radical, but wow, does that increase idea generation, creativity, loyalty, so many of the things that you want to see in a healthy work culture.
Adam, what about you?
I think a lot of this starts with hiring. So one of the things you see is most leaders hire primarily today on cultural fit. Do you share our values as opposed to skills or potential? And that's great if you're a startup. You're less likely to fail, you're more likely to go public. And then companies that hire on culture fit after they go public grow at much slower rates than their peers. Why? Culture fit is a great proxy for similarity. for homogeneity, for hiring a bunch of people who think and look exactly like I do. And so you end up getting a lot of groupthink that way. What I would love to see more organizations do is prioritize not cultural fit, but cultural contribution. This is a great idea from Diego Rodriguez, who's here today at IDEO. And his point is, look, instead of trying to figure out what's important in the culture and then cloning that, let's figure out what's missing from the culture and then bring it in. And that goes beyond hiring, right? To figure out who's going to enrich your culture and make it better, I think is a critical question for how you evaluate performance, how you promote people. And I don't think we see enough leaders asking who is making our culture better.
And what have you seen from your research in terms of how companies create the sort of the modern day suggestion box? If you've got ideas, how do you get that from people?
I think innovation tournaments have a lot of good data behind them. So the problem with the suggestion box is that anyone can comment on anything at any time, right? So you're all excited to get new ideas and you get, I would like the bathrooms to be cleaned more often,
Right.
which is sometimes useful but not what you're looking for. An innovation tournament basically boils this down to say, we're looking for these kinds of ideas. We have a 3-week window typically, and then anyone can submit. The ideas are evaluated by subject matter experts and peers, and then the best ones are advanced to the next round, and eventually you can create your own job if you win the tournament. And if you don't, you get a ton of feedback, and the goal is to be a little bit better next time.
And what does your research show about people staying up for 24 hours for hackathons?
I can't say anything particularly good about the long-term effects of that.
Because I've heard so many CEOs who do these hackathons, flip days, come into work at 10 o'clock and we'll stay up to 6, and it sounds great, but I'm not sure if creativity,
Not good.
I want to talk about body language with you, Amy, because obviously it's something that you study so much. And over the course of interviewing hundreds of CEOs, I often talk about the moment when they, what changes once they become CEO. There's the difference between the theory of the job and the reality of the job. And what I've heard from so many of them is that they realize the sort of the power of even small gestures. They walk through the lobby of their offices and arch their eyebrow in a certain way, and suddenly people are scurrying and repainting it because they assume they didn't like the color. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that. What advice do you have? I mean, you can't be sort of a monolithic facade. You have to be authentic, but you also have to really calibrate your body language. So.
Yeah, you do. But you have to do it in a way that is authentic, right? So which is part of the struggle. First of all, I'm glad to hear that you talk to CEOs who are aware of those things, because I think that we sort of lose awareness of those things as we acquire power. The big thing is that as we acquire power, without even thinking about it, we begin to expand more. We take up more physical space. We take up more temporal space. We take up more idea space. And so when someone is coming in to interact with you and you're the most powerful person in the organization and your body language is really expansive, and you're not doing it to be dominant, you're doing it because you actually are dominant, the other person, what they do is they complement your body language by collapsing. And this is really interesting because usually when it comes to nonverbal behavior and interactions, people mirror each other. This is one of the exceptions. When there's a clear power asymmetry, the powerful person is going to get bigger, the powerless one is going to get smaller. And when people start to feel smaller, they shut down. They are not creative. They become very fearful. They feel like they're in a fight or flight situation. And you don't want to be interacting with people like that. You want to be getting the most out of them. You want to be creating value in the interaction. So I think the most important thing is to be mindful that as a leader, you want open body language, you want confident body language, but body language that also says, I'm interested in you, I'm listening to you, I'm engaged. So come out from behind the desk, sit down right next to them, look at them, right in their eyes, same level. And keep in mind that when they start to turn away, something's happened, right? Some trust has been broken, they've become frightened. Lean forward, ask them questions, allow them to reconnect with you.
That's great. So the next question is for both of you, but I'm going to start with Adam, because you make an argument in your book that women are often penalized for originality at work, while men are often rewarded for it. So, provocative notion. I'm sure you both have thoughts on it, but let's start with you.
Yeah, of course, give the man the women question first. I was at least relieved to see that the power expert got the tallest chair today.
Thank you. And the center chair.
As it should be more often. No, I mean, look, Adam, the short version of this is when I started teaching, I was very naive about this. I walked into my classroom at Wharton, and I expected that in the 21st century, we would be evaluating people and ideas on their contribution and merit, not on gender. Yeah. And I was blown away when year after year, we had half as many female leaders as we should have. And it was kind of a little bit of an eye-opening experience. So Sheryl Sandberg and I did some analysis of data that I've been collecting, and I was stunned to discover that when men spoke up with ideas, they were rewarded and celebrated. When women spoke up with the same ideas, same quality, they were either barely heard, and then usually a man swooped in and said, oh, by the way, I'm going to take credit for that. Or they were judged as too aggressive, because after all, women are stereotyped to be communal and caring, and this was an act of dominance. And I think it's a travesty, and I think that we all need to check our biases on this and say, look, every single time that a woman asserts an opinion, we are vulnerable to saying, wait a minute, is that too aggressive? And it's worth asking, would I have responded the same way if a man had brought that idea to the table?
That's great.
And on top of that, women are aware of these biases. So when you go into a situation as a woman and you want to share an idea, you know that there's a risk that you're going to be shot down, that you're going to be judged as too aggressive. And then if you do get negative feedback, it creates something that we call attributional ambiguity, which means you're not sure if it's because of your gender or because the idea was bad. So now you're distracted and not present because you're trying to figure this out. So I think that this idea of expansiveness applies also to, again, speaking and sharing ideas. There's good work on power by a researcher named Adam Galinsky, showing that the differences that you see between powerful and powerless people mirror gender differences. So gender differences are really about power differences. And yeah, I think we do need to be checking our biases. I mean, it is our responsibility to know when we're listening to these ideas that this filter might be, corrupting what we're hearing. So I think remember that women are aware, and it makes it an even bigger challenge for them. And yeah, be open to what they're saying in the way that you would be open to a man.
I don't want to monopolize these two. I imagine there's questions from the audience. We've got a few minutes for a couple. Start with, do we have microphones? You would just introduce who you are and who you work for. That would be great.
Good morning. My name is Ian Kalin. I work for the federal government. Question, given your expertise in being original, body language, listening, I thought I'd ask the speakers, what's most interesting to you personally about the current presidential election and how they're communicating with Americans?
Yes, he went there.
Are we on the record?
No, I think we're among family here.
All right, well, look, I teach at the Donald J. Trump School of Business. I think what's most fascinating about the election, actually on both sides of the debate, this is not a partisan statement, is Susan Cain said a couple years ago that there is zero correlation between who's the best talker and who has the best ideas. And I think the current cycle is convincing me that that correlation is not zero, it's negative.
So what I'm noticing is that the kind of body language people used to be looking for, people often ask me, what's presidential body language? And it's not oration. This is a new style. People don't want it to be scripted and have candidates speaking and thinking that their words are chiseled in stone as they're coming out of their mouths. That's not the way it works. So when people are doing that, when they're overcoached and over-choreographed, you have no idea if they're being authentic. And viscerally, you pull away. You go, I don't like that. Because when people lie, the best way to know that they're lying is to look for asynchronies across the verbal and nonverbal channels. So they might be telling a happy story, but their body's doing something that's not happy. So one of the things I notice in this cycle is that people are because millennials are now much more vocal, they're responding to authentic body language. So people who are saying things that match their body language, they don't care if that person has lint on his shoulder or his hair is messy. They're responding to the authenticity. Because what that person is saying, anyone who's doing that, is this is what I really, truly care about. No politician can promise anything, right? But they can promise that they really care about this thing, and it comes through in that synchronized body language. Even if it's awkward and strange, it's synchronized for that person. So that's what I'm looking for.
That's great. Who else? Question right there. Give a microphone.
I have the mic. Jody Holtzman from AARP, and I'm not going to ask about Washington. One word that popped up but was not a focus in your comments was the word trust. How do you build a culture of trust when the rhetoric of management is all about innovation, but the autopilot is command and control?
This is tough. And the word leadership is still sort of at odds with these notions of trust. I think we're catching up, but it's kind of tough to go in and teach leadership when people think leadership is about one person. And now we're going to tell you, actually, it's all about trust and listening to other people. My honest answer is that I think that we're going to catch up, and we're going to have more and more models of organizations that are working well by sort of having a leader who is more quiet and more listening oriented and kind of seeing the results. But I don't think we're there yet. And it is a battle in the MBA classroom anytime you talk to an audience of business leaders.
Yeah, the best example I've seen of this is I spent a bunch of time with Ray Dalio at Bridgewater. And you can disagree with videotaping every meeting or some of the other practices that are pretty unusual. But the thing that I was most impressed by is they believe really strongly that as a hedge fund that only beats the market by thinking differently, nobody has the right to hold a critical opinion without speaking up about it. And to the point where you can get fired, right, if you don't challenge other people and criticize even up the hierarchy. And Ray, I think, really came to a test when a few years ago he was in a client meeting that was pretty consequential for the firm. And a guy 3 levels below him sent him an email that said, "Dear Ray, I give you a D- for your performance in this meeting. You rambled for over an hour. This was a huge deal, and I think you blew it." And it actually went on for about 2 pages, this message. Now, I don't know many people who would send that email to the billionaire founder of their company. I don't know many founders who would not fire this guy. Ray replies and says, "I'm really sorry I let you down." He copies the entire executive committee of Bridgewater and asks them to investigate all of his previous meetings and see if this is a pattern, and if so, what he can learn from it. And then the co-CEO of Bridgewater copies the entire company on that trail to show when you give feedback upward, even if it's something that people don't want to hear, they need to hear it. And this is how we're going to respond to it. I would love to see more leaders responding in that way.
That's great. Time for one more question this side of the room. Sharon?
Hi, how are you? I'm Sharon Napier. I run Partners in Napier, which is a marketing and advertising agency. And I'd love, Amy and Adam, for you to give all the women in the room one piece of practical advice. And here's the situation. I sit on a global board for our holding company. I'm one of 2 women, have lots of great ideas. So you talk about, women are penalized and men are rewarded for original ideas. So whenever I'm in this situation, the only thing I can think of is using humor to make sure that my voice is heard. But do you have any practical advice? You talk about it from a leader's point of view. What about if you're in that situation with a group of leaders? So love some one piece of practical advice.
So this one.
All right, well, my favorite thing is actually to say the biggest mistake that I see people make when they're pitching original ideas is they get judged as Pollyannas. They're too enthusiastic about their own idea, they've fallen in love with it, and it's hard for them to imagine why other people might not like it. And there's a bunch of research suggesting that a more balanced pitch, where you actually admit the limitations or weaknesses of your own idea, makes people more receptive to it. They're less likely to judge you as overly assertive or aggressive. Rufus Griscom, who's here, did this brilliantly in his startup pitches. He actually went to investors and said, "Here are the 3 reasons that you should not invest in my company." And he walked away with great funding. He sold his company the same way 2 years later. He can tell you more about it. But I think a couple of things happen when you acknowledge your shortcomings up front. One, it grabs attention, because that is very rare outside a debate. People don't expect it. 2, you actually make it harder for people to think of their own objections. They're like, "Wow, I was going to show I was smart by shooting you down in 3 different ways. And you covered 2 of those. So now instead I'm going to show I'm smart by telling you how to overcome those problems. And now we're going to work together." And then 3, you show that you're self-critical, right? Which is a signal of intelligence. And I think we need a little bit of a cultural shift that makes it okay to say, "I have this idea, here's why I think it's important. here are the biggest flaws that I see in it. And I'd love to have a conversation about how to overcome those.
Very similar advice. So I like to talk to venture capitalists about what they're looking for. So say they have 5 equally good ideas on paper, and they have no biases, toward certain content. They're looking at pitches. What are they looking for? This is the thing that comes up again and again. People say, if I sense for a minute that they don't buy the story they're telling, there's no way that I'm going to buy the story. But that doesn't mean that they have to have all the answers. And if they think they have all the answers, then it's over as well, right? So you need to believe the story that you're telling, and often we believe it until we get to the door, and then suddenly we're flooded with self-doubt. So you need to believe the story and communicate that. You need to deliver it with confidence, but not arrogance, right? Don't put up that wall that prevents people from challenging you. It doesn't come across well, and it just tells investors, why would I want to work with this person? They're not open to feedback, because if you really care about an idea, you should be open to making it as good as you possibly can. So not having all the answers is okay, and don't feel nervous going in that way. And when you sort of believe your story and you can communicate confidence without arrogance, that's when you get this sort of harmonious synchrony across your verbal and nonverbal channels, which is incredibly compelling. It's even it's appealing. It's what people want. That's how presence convinces.
We could talk all day. We are running an on-time airline here. So if you could all join me in thanking Amy and Adam.